much for being here and joining us, staying after lunch. We appreciate it. I'm Michelle Fay Cortez, and I will put myself out there. I started with Bloomberg in 1992 in Washington, D.C., and I covered everything. I was one of the first reporters in D.C. One of the things I covered was the Food and Drug Administration, and we used to send a courier to Rockville every day to pick up any fact sheets that they would have because press releases didn't exist back then. So our culture has completely changed since then. I've changed along with it. I still cover medical technology for Bloomberg, and I'm the host of our Prognosis podcast, so please listen. And I will let Dr. Saxon introduce herself.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Saxon, and I'm an interventional cardiologist, cardiac electrophysiologist. I implant devices and do procedures in the heart for heart rhythm disorders. 30-year career doing that. 16 years ago, I started a digital health and innovation center a couple years before the iPhone came out. So it was more science fiction then. And now I do mostly that, and I work in digital healthcare, virtual care, and in human performance.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Earnhardt. I head up medical devices for Abbott. Abbott is a health technology company that is focused on ensuring people live better and longer lives through our life-changing technology. I have been at the intersection of healthcare and technology, I'll just say my entire career, so we'll just say decades. So obviously it's really exciting to be here at this meeting today. I have spent my time both in large corporations like global leaders like Abbott, as well as the last 10 years at a startup in Silicon Valley.
So I have to say what I love about this panel is that we have Lisa, who has a history of developing and launching innovative new technologies. And she's really going to be able to talk about how the regulated medical technology companies are adjusting to this new world, this consumer-first, digitally driven world. And we have Dr. Saxon, who has been at the forefront of this movement since it began in 2006. And she brings the receipts. She's done the research. She has the evidence that can tell us how this technology is literally changing the way that we live our lives. So bringing them together is going to be a really powerful and inspiring, I think, conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. So let's start with the technology. We're not talking about robots here, cute that they may be, or even sleep trackers, but there have been some really dramatic breakthroughs when it comes to medical technology and putting patients first. So maybe give us the highlights of what technology we're looking at.
Technology is clearly becoming a natural part of how we manage our lives as well as manage our health. And I think there are some key trends that are really driving this transformation to what I would call the smart body. So we talk a lot about here, especially here at CES, at things like the smartphone and the smart refrigerator and the smart car. What I love for us to be thinking about are smart bodies. And there's technologies like sensor technology. So if I want to understand my glucose levels, I can simply swipe the back of my arm. It's things like miniaturization of technology, making things less invasive, making more accessible to a broader group of people around the globe. That's something that we're doing, for example, with a heart monitor, where it now is simply the size of a small paper clip that gets inserted right under the skin that becomes a heart monitor 24/7. It's like having a physician inside of you. Another area is where sort of disrupting the status quo in terms of how we're managing chronic diseases. As I look around the room, chances are about 60% of you suffer from chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, chronic pain. And it's technologies that we're bringing forward that are really kind of becoming as first-line therapy or are used much sooner in the care continuum to help improve outcomes and ultimately lower costs. And finally, and I think critically important, that's really driving this technology field forward as it relates to healthcare is what we're doing with data. And I think early in my career, I worked with hospitals and healthcare systems, and we talked about, gosh, wouldn't the world be amazing if we just had this thing called an electronic medical record? Well, I have to say we're there now, 25, 30 years later, actually. And we still have quite a bit of work to do to be able to translate the data that we're collecting into insights and to ultimately making actionable decisions on our health. And really that connectivity and being able to sort of connect all the disparate data sources and implying things like AI and predictive analytics is making a huge step forward and really what I think will help enable what we consider the future, which is the smart body. So exciting things happening on the technology front.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about those insights, right? The title of our talk here is Proving the Transformational Nature of Technology. And I think that that's where Dr. Saxon and her experience, setting up the USC Center for Body Computing has been actually proving that from the beginning. And honestly, I think that that's a little bit of where the consumer health world has gone a little bit astray, right? The way that we say it is, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. And we really haven't seen that quite so much from the consumer health side of the world, but we see that from your laboratory. So if you could walk us through actually what we know, I know you're an electrophysiologist, what can you tell us in terms of proving that these technologies are changing our medical care?
Yeah, it's so you've got technologies in regulated companies that are minimally invasive, now digital, capable of connecting. You've got a dominant computing platform, the smartphone that everyone in the world has practically, right? And so you have the ability to now, ironically, really deliver a much more personalized, individual, predictive model of care. So the 20th century was defined by sick care. Hospitals made enormous strides in medical systems and companies in saving lives, improving survival. But now it's more of a continuous, individualized model of healthcare where you're getting data all the time. It's curation. It's what do I need to eat, do, and think now. You're constantly being diagnosed because you can be. So there needs to be a marriage of different companies there, and then proving that, identifying scientifically even the right models for digital care. And I think that traditional healthcare, it's not going to come from there. It's like iTunes didn't come from a record company, okay? And this isn't going to come from traditional healthcare because they're disrupting themselves, but with telehealth and things that are still not really what the consumer needs, the integration, the curation, the continuous nature. So proving that, developing the new even scientific plans to prove that that integrated care matters. And that the reason that's so profound is that it's the only thing that could affordably provide healthcare for the globe. But the other thing is, it's the only thing that really has any kind of shot at getting behavioral change to, forget about diabetes, work on obesity. So what do I need now? How does my body work? What are my metabolites that tell me, not so much how many calories I take in, I think it'll be more, how does my body react to that individualized insight. So we try to create those, and those are very personal, it's emotional. We're talking about technology here, but your healthcare narrative is your narrative, it's emotional, it's the thing you care about. Everybody got up here from Katie Couric, talked about their story and how they got engaged, right? So we have a chance to be on people's phones, to get to them emotionally, to create community. So social networks are important. Tech companies are important, but you have to have the gravitas of knowing it's safe, that knowing it's cyber safe, and not to mention, how do you define healthcare data, right? Maybe Google defines it as geolocation. If that's true, and it is true, it's a big determinant of health, maybe somebody else defines it in a HIPAA, very narrow HIPAA range. The truth is that legislation, how we define that, is going to even determine policy around this whole thing, right?
Right.
And so there are all these profound questions, but it's going to be jailbroke, and I think that less than 20% of healthcare will take place in traditionals, and that's a good thing because where do we really fall back? Where do we lose in traditional healthcare? We have a lousy service model. We're like taxis in San Francisco in 1988. Yeah. No service, so we need
Having
to
lived there, and I totally agree.
Oh, they hung up on you when you called.
Yeah.
You said, "Oh, you're coming." They just hung up on you.
I know. What's so crazy now is like you think about Uber, and you think about every step of the way where you are, where your driver is, when you're going to get to your destination. Why shouldn't you get that same information about your health, right?
A lot of that means not going to the medical center.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about how we're actually going to get there, because you point out that it wasn't the record companies that created Spotify and that sort of a thing, but then we also have seen some of the tech companies coming into the healthcare space. Apple's certainly working in it, Google, Verily, all that sort of stuff, and we haven't gotten there yet. And a lot of us, when we look at our medical care where you can still, get a stethoscope and you have the thing put on your arm, right? A lot of it is still pretty low tech. And when we think about high tech, we think about electronic medical records. There's so much work to be done there. So how are we going to meet these two together? Yeah. I mean, or is there going to be yet a third iteration? So Lisa, are the companies going to come to the tech companies and bring them in? And Dr. Saxon, you're the one who's at the intersection of both those groups. Everybody's coming to you, I think. Yeah. So.
And I do think it will require, like everything in healthcare, collaboration. Everything that we develop, we work very closely with clinicians, hospital administrators, ultimately the end user, oftentimes patients. That's so critically important to making innovation that matters to people, right? That is really going to make a difference. I think about that on the context of where we are now with health technology, and we're going to all need to work together. So any company that thinks they can do this on their own, I think will fail miserably. And the fact that we're experts coming from the healthcare world, both Dr. Saxon and myself, we live in the world where we understand HIPAA, we understand the regulatory environment, the legal requirements, what's required there. And I would say technology companies understand sort of that innovation cycle and really putting the consumer first in a way that, quite honestly, historically, we haven't done as well of as a medical technology industry. So clearly, it's an area that we need to do better, and we're learning just as much from our tech brethrens as I believe that they can learn from us. So I think it's a real win-win that we have multiple folks coming into the healthcare space. I think that will just breed a lot of innovation, competition, and that's all good, because ultimately, there's a lot of work to do in healthcare. We are just scratching the surface.
Yeah, so, how's it going to play out? Is it going to be first of all, there hasn't been that home run product yet, really, that integrates and manages your life care, we call it. There hasn't been that thing, that smartphone of whatever, the iTunes. So what software services break it open that face the consumer and really provide that data that allows patients to have a dog in the fight and really start to manage themselves? What are the culture changes that have to take place in tech companies and in traditional healthcare? Because there's this wealth gap. Tech companies have all the money. Healthcare providers run it hardly a profit. Healthcare regulated companies don't have nearly the worth. There's a trust gap with the tech companies. How are they going to handle the data? Big trust gap, right? That needs to be probably resolved with policy. And what will be the accelerant, though? There's going to be that product, right, that somebody gets to manage their disease that doesn't involve any of this oversight complexity, that's just so ruthlessly efficient that everybody will do it, and then it'll be like the scramble. But that's the kind of the thing we're always trying to develop.
So you think it's going to be a software?
Yeah,
the first step will be a software step.
But the thing is, probably software, engaging software, that's just a must. That's table stakes. But because the patient has to want to get into it every day, or just the consumer, the person who's seeking wellness. But think about continuous blood pressure. We need it, we want it, it's essential. But we're not going to know what it means. Half of the data that I sit on, whether it's an NFL player or a heart failure patient with their intracardiac pressures, I don't know what it means, and I'm like an expert in this because I've never seen continuous data. So it takes a while to figure that out, right? You're benchmarking it to some antiquated, it's like benchmarking democracy to fascism. Like, no, it's hard. So you have to figure it out.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So one of the big issues here is that we're creating vast amounts of data, and what on earth is anyone going to do with that?
Always more, right?
Exactly. So what is the obligation for the companies to actually make it in some sort of a manageable outcome information with that?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges and opportunities we have, quite honestly, as an industry, is that different stakeholders need and want different levels of data, right? And so what is okay for, one 50-year-old person might be very different than an 80-year-old, might be very different than a parent of a pediatric diabetic patient, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges as well, is trying to make sure we're meeting consumers where they are and where they want the data and how they want to consume that data. And that's hard because it really becomes, as Dr. Saxon said, it really becomes a need for customization. And that's something in healthcare we're generally not very good at, right? So we have the solution. If you build it, they will come, right? Much like the Field of Dreams. And so
line up and wait.
And line up and wait
yeah.
wait 3 weeks for an appointment, and then 4 weeks, 4 months for a surgery, what have you. That's not okay. So the great news is we see how software, we see how data can be used and fed and customized to consumers in other industries that we absolutely can pull in. We just need to do so under the context and understanding of what's required from an FDA, from a regulatory body, from a legal requirement, and absolutely the privacy. And I think that's a key thing, that trust that we've built. A company like Abbott has been around and successful for 130 years. So we understand that patient data is really the most personal thing someone owns, right? That is who they are. And so that trust that we have built in sort of keeping that data secure is just paramount. That needs to be table stakes. It's not today, obviously.
Yeah.
quite a bit of work to do.
And talking about data, having all this information, we've had some interesting conversations about what people are willing to do with it and how much they want to be involved in it, right? I think about, if you're sick, if you're maybe elderly, or if you're young, you're 18 or 22 and, you're on TikTok and Snapchat, like if you have a health condition, how much time and effort do you really want to put into it versus how much time do you want your doctor to be telling you what to do? It sounds like that is changing a little bit as you get into it.
I think this digital virtual care is going to just blow up the model of point visit care. Your health care is going to be more like starting as soon as you're on your first device, and your mother or parents will be managing it before that, so that it's a more continuous thing. It's not like, I'm well, I'm sick. It's like the whole thing, right?
So that
means you're continuously interacting with your data, your biometric data, whatever the data is, ideally, and you're getting told things that you need to know. Like everybody knows when they get sick, a week before they felt sick, right? You need to know that week before, well, what can I do? Maybe I shouldn't travel. Things like that's just massive discovery. But how do you get all that data in one place, identify, de-identify, whatever, to start to make those observations? I'll tell you one thing, everything I'm talking about takes about 90% of the cost out. So that can either throw people on their can and destroy the industries like much of digital has with media entertainment, or it can, be a brand new opportunity. What's the hybrid? I don't think the thinking is coming from traditional healthcare, at least delivery facilities. They're still struggling with they're at such a disadvantage, right? They have to worry about telehealth, and they have to worry about state-by-state licensure. It's never going to come from them. That's the slow boat to China. Everything is disincentivized to orient around the patient. So it's probably going to come from somewhere else, probably should, but you need that gravitas, you need the evidence base, you need a lot of that expertise, obviously. But I just don't ever see traditional healthcare really wrapping their head around the patient all the time. It's antithetical almost to the way we deliver healthcare. Having practiced in that environment for 30 years and just pulled my hair out, worked 90 hours a week just to keep the sun from setting on a cardiology console, because it's complex. And getting all the experts together and really giving people what they need when they need it, this emotional time. So it has to be story, it has to be creative, it has to be like TikTok. And
it has
all
to be
that.
coming.
Yeah, and I do think there's a difference as well. Like, so we're, historically we're focusing a lot on individuals with chronic conditions, right? And I think that's a great place to start, because that is where the vast majority of our healthcare resources are consumed. And they, oftentimes have, incredibly deleterious side effects and ultimately can lead to death, right? And so important area to focus. And then I think the tech companies are over here on the generally healthy, younger consumer, right? And I do think there's this opportunity, to your point, around can we just meet folks along the continuum of care and actually intervene earlier to potentially predict and prevent diseases from occurring, right? And so, but I do think it makes sense to be starting where we are, but I'm hopeful 10 years from now, we see a world that, there isn't such a big divide. It becomes one, and it just becomes a natural part of how we're managing our health.
Well, and you both talked about that. You talked about the smart body, and you talk about life care rather than health care. So my question is how are we going to get those two pieces together? How are we going to get the regulated medical technology companies who are working with patients and the health tech companies who are working with consumers to meet? And I think that on the regulated company side, maybe we lose a little bit of the idea of the patient is actually the consumer. So much of our data has been residing with the health system or with the doctor, and patients can't even get access to their records for such a long period of time. So how are we going to bring those two pieces together? And more significantly, who's going to pay for that process as it happens?
I think we need more of the first of all, the traditional care needs to get real and quit acting like they own the patient or their data. It's theirs, and they need to stop the paternalistic kind of attitudes. And tech companies need to really come to the table, just like they've embraced, entertainment. Come to the table on healthcare. Go to the FDA. Prove your stuff works. And they can. And Apple took a step toward that with the ECG. Super important. And traditional care needs to stop fighting that. It needs to stop saying we don't have guidelines. If I don't know what it means for you to take an ECG, you shouldn't take it. That's that's just, we're not even there to answer the call. Why can't a patient diagnose themselves and get on a drug and then see us if it's safe? And the healthcare companies need to use that wealth and get serious about really strategy, as they've done in entertainment. Why haven't they done it? It's culture, right? It's hard.
The money's there.
But everybody, like we've heard today, everybody cares about it.
Yeah. But I do think it's us all coming to the table, right? So it's tech companies, it's healthcare companies, it's regulators, it's policymakers. All of us need to come together because we're challenged in terms of managing healthcare here in the U.S. and clearly globally. So we're all getting older and sicker. If no one told you that, now you know. And we've got work to do, and we absolutely have to be at the table and working together on this. So it's not a us or them, it's we're doing it together. We absolutely, collaboration is key.
Right. And so, Dr. Saxon, what are you seeing in your practice, like at the Center for Body Computing? Do you see the consumer tech companies coming to you to start, proving some of their data? Are you getting the?
Yeah, I think on both sides. Look, Apple and all these other companies, Amazon or whatever they're creating, they want the use cases. They want to say, how do we use this? How does this help improve someone's health or chronic disease?
Here's this great whiz-bang technology.
Yeah.
What do we
it's
do with
software.
it?
How can you use this to really transform health? And then the traditionals are coming and saying, oh my God, how do we get into more disease management? How do we work with the companies? How do we get the data? How do we make sure it's... And they're a little bit of disadvantage because, the FDA, if you get in their crosshairs, there's a big price to pay, right? You can not get any product approved if for some... So there's a risk that's probably a little higher for traditionals. And but at some point you have to take that risk, right? If that's the future.
So people who are out there innovating, and maybe people in this room or people who are listening, where would you go if you have a great technology or a great idea? Would you go to a tech company? Would you come to you and say, hey, I've got an idea? Or would you go to Lisa and say...
Yeah, Lisa might buy you. She's got a big portfolio of lots of money. But
Lisa might buy you.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate
think
that.
You go to Lisa or you come to us, or you go to a sports team with some data. You don't take immature technology and throw it into some situation and let them pay you and then build your business model in AI. That's clearly sour, muddies the waters. So I think you just approach it like an adult.
Yeah, and I do think the data, bringing proof to the table, and fortunately we're at a point with remote follow-up and with the data that we're actually able to do clinical trials in a much more efficient fashion than we ever have done before, potentially utilizing real-world evidence. But I think, we still need to do what has made the healthcare product world so successful over the last, 50 years, is we need to demonstrate improved outcomes and potentially lowering costs. Like at the end of the day, those are winning. It's a winning combination, right? And we absolutely have to prove things are safe, right? And so I think those things together really need to come to the table. You just can't talk about the technology for technology's sake. That will go nowhere in healthcare.
So last question, talking about technology for technology's sake. Just wondering if you guys have anything that you're interested in here at CES, at the Digital Health Conference, something that you're interested in either professionally or personally. Are you going to get out there in an autonomous car? Are you going to... I was in those massagers down at the booth. They're amazing. So is there...
Yes on the massagers. Yes on the cars. I'm going to go see everything because, the car, transportation, the car is going to be a place people are going to get healthcare. Car could be a clinic now. You don't have to drive it, right? So I'm going to think about all that stuff through the lens of kind of you connected to a healthcare solution.
Everything that you see here can be part of a life care.
Yeah. And I'm sort of eating and breathing all things digital health. And so I do think just understanding how we're leveraging data and translate that into not just information, but insights, right? And how can it really empowering the patients in a way that we haven't before? Because we absolutely need to get those patients at the table to be part of their healthcare decision-making and management. So that's the only way we're going to be able to sort of intervene earlier, start preventing diseases versus treating things like obesity and chronic pain and diabetes. Let's just stop them from occurring in the first place. It's bold, it's ambitious, it will likely not happen in my lifetime. However, it is something that we aspire to do.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everyone.